The sound of gunshots shattered the evening quiet of Redemption, Texas. 3 rapid cracks from a Colt. .45 echoed through the saloon's smoke-filled air. The piano player's fingers froze mid-note. Whiskey glasses stopped halfway to parched lips. And 3 bodies hit the rough-hewn floor with dull thuds, their guns still warm in lifeless hands. Through the haze of gun smoke stood Marshal Wyatt Blackwood, weathered face unflinching beneath the shadow of his hat. The revolver in his hand, a meticulously maintained peacemaker with custom ivory grips, still whispered steam from its barrel. Blood from a fresh cut above his eye traced a crimson path down his leathered cheek. "In this land," he said, voice like gravel on iron, "the law sits at the end of a gun barrel, and I am its keeper." He holstered his weapon with practiced precision, a movement so fluid it seemed the gun disappeared into the leather. The sound of metal sliding against oiled leather was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. The saloon remained deathly silent as he dropped 3 gold coins on the counter. For the mess. Blackwood stepped into the dust-choked street, the setting Texas sun casting his shadow long and dark across the dirt. At 50, the former Union captain carried himself with the straight-back discipline of a lifetime soldier. His eyes, steel gray beneath a shock of silver hair, missed nothing, cataloging threats with the efficiency of a man who'd survived battles both on and off the battlefield. Redemption was hardly worthy of its name, a ragged collection of weather-beaten structures that clung to existence on the edge of civilization. The bank, the saloon, the brothel, the trading post, each building a testament to man's determination to carve something from nothing, even if that something was soaked in blood and regret. The year was 1871. The wounds of the Civil War still festered beneath hastily applied bandages of progress. Blackwood had worn Union blue, fought under Grant at Shiloh, and carried the physical and invisible scars to prove it. His right leg bore the legacy of a Confederate Minié ball. His back, a crosshatch of lash marks from 6 months in Andersonville prison. His boots left imprints in the dirt as he made his way toward the edge of town. Intel from a half-drunk cattle rustler had led him hear whispers of an operation too dark to speak of in daylight. Human cargo, traded like cattle. The old grain warehouse loomed at the town's edge, a hulking shadow against the purpling sky. Blackwood checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. First, the Colt .45 with its custom-filed trigger for a smoother pull. Then the Arkansas toothpick knife in his boot, its 14-inch blade honed to a razor's edge. His fingers traced the worn grip of his revolver, smooth from years of use, like a rosary for a man whose prayers were spoken in lead. Laughter echoed from within the structure. Blackwood moved silently around its perimeter, years of tracking deserters having taught him to move like a ghost. Through a crack in the warped wood, he saw them 15 men gathered in a semicircle around a makeshift platform. On it stood a young woman, no more than 17, her wrists bound with iron chains. Next up, bellowed a fat man in a stained suit, strong back, young bones, no family asking questions. The girl stood defiant, chin raised, though her dress was more dust than fabric. Her dark hair fell across shoulders that refused to bow despite the chains that bound them. $5 to start, the auctioneer barked. No takers? Then she's worth less than horse feed. I'll pay 20, came Blackwood's voice from the doorway where he now stood, framed by the dying light, hand resting casually near his holster. All heads turned. Recognition dawned on face after face, followed by fear. The badge on Blackwood's chest caught a stray beam of sunset, gleaming like a fallen star. $20 for her? The auctioneer stammered. Blackwood's eyes never left the girl's face. There was something familiar there, something that stirred ancient memories from the battlefield. As he stepped forward, boots echoing on the wooden planks, recognition slammed into him like a physical blow. Those eyes, deep green, that had seen too much, he knew them. They belonged to Daniel Hayes, the man who'd taken a Confederate bayonet meant for Blackwood at Shiloh, the man whose final words had been of his daughter back home. Sold, the auctioneer declared with the crack of his gavel, breaking Blackwood's reverie. As he approached the platform, the girl's eyes flicked up defiant, alive with hatred. "You paid for me," she said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Now do it." Blackwood unlocked her chains with a small key from his pocket. They fell away with a dull clatter. "No one wears chains in my jurisdiction," he said quietly. The girl rubbed her wrists, staring at the raw skin. The auctioneer pushed forward, nervous energy radiating from his sweating form. "You don't understand, Marshal. This ain't what it looks." Blackwood's movement was almost too fast to follow. His left hand gripped the man's collar while his right pressed the Colt's barrel under the auctioneer's quivering chin. "I didn't know she had any connection to you," the man blubbered. "Now you do," Blackwood replied. "And everyone here should know this is the last time I'll see this happening in my county." His gaze swept the room, cold as December iron. "Clear out. Anyone still here when I count to 10 gets a room at the jailhouse." The warehouse emptied in seconds. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of coyotes. Blackwood led the way toward town, the girl following a few steps behind. "Your name," he said, not a question but a statement. "Sarah," she answered after a pause. "Sarah Hayes." "Hayes," Blackwood repeated, the name heavy with meaning. "Daniel Hayes was your father." She stopped, the name hitting her like a physical blow. "You knew my father?" 7th of April, 1862, Battle of Shiloh. Blackwood's voice carried across the darkening plain. "Bloodiest 2 days I'd ever seen. Union forces pushed back to Pittsburgh Landing. We were surrounded, ammunition low. The sky deepened to indigo as they walked, his words painting images of horror against the twilight. Your father was at my side. Confederate charge broke through our line. A rebel soldier came at me with a bayonet. I'd lost my sidearm, was reloading my rifle. They reached the edge of town, where a modest cabin stood beside the jailhouse. Your father stepped between us, took the blade meant for me." Blackwood's voice remained steady, but something ancient and pained lived beneath the words. "Last thing he said was your name." Sarah's expression hardened, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "And now you've paid for his daughter at auction," she said bitterly. "What a world of honor we live in." "I didn't buy you, Sarah. I bought your freedom." "Freedom?" She laughed, hollow and sharp. "That's just another word men like to sell." Blackwood opened the door to his cabin. "You can stay here tonight. No one will bother you." She hesitated, glancing from the open door to the vast darkness beyond town, then stepped inside. As Blackwood turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "They wore badges," she said. "The men who came for us, 3 years after the war, said we were harboring deserters." Blackwood turned slowly. "Who led them?" "A man with a scar. Here." She traced a line from her left eye to her jaw. "Called himself the law, but he burned like the devil." Something cold and hard settled in Blackwood's gut. The description matched Jackson Reed, once his brother in arms, now the most notorious outlaw in 3 territories. "Your father was a geologist before the war," Blackwood said, pieces falling into place. "Found something valuable, didn't he?" Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket. "How did you know?" "Because men like Reed don't burn farms for deserters. They burn them for treasure." "Get some rest," he said, his mind already mapping the hunt to come. "Tomorrow, we talk." The night swallowed his figure as he stepped back into the street, his shadow merging with the darkness that had birthed it. Dawn broke over redemption like a fever, hot, insistent, unforgiving. Blackwood stood on his porch, the taste of black coffee bitter on his tongue. His Winchester .66 Yellow Boy rifle gleamed dully in the early light, freshly oiled and loaded with 44 rimfire cartridges. On his hip, the Colt sat in its worn holster, loaded with 6 freshly polished rounds. Sarah emerged from the cabin, her face set with determination. She'd washed the dust from her skin and hair, borrowed clothes from Blackwood's sparse collection. Now, with the chains gone and her head held high, she looked more like the daughter of Daniel Hayes, a soldier's offspring, born with steel in her spine. "You're going after him," she said. "Not a question." Blackwood nodded once. "Jackson Reed, ex-Union officer, turned outlaw after the war. I'm coming with you. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. This isn't... I can shoot a squirrel at 100 yards, she interrupted, her voice steady. My father taught me. Before they took him. Before they took everything. To prove her point, she pulled an old silver pocket watch from her dress. This was his. The only thing I saved that night. For a long moment, Blackwood said nothing, simply studying her face. There was no fear there, only a cold, burning resolve. When I signal, you run, he finally said. No discussion. She nodded once, accepting his terms. Charlie Miller, the young deputy with eager eyes and untested courage, joined them at the stables. At 25, he reminded Blackwood of soldiers he'd seen at Gettysburg full of patriotic fire before the first cannon's roar taught them the true face of war. Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, Blackwood told him as they mounted. Where we're going, mistakes die quick. The trio rode north, following whispers and rumors that placed Reed's gang in the hills beyond Diablo Canyon. 2 days of hard riding stretched before them, 2 days of dust, heat, and the growing certainty that blood would be spilled before justice was served. That night, camped in a hidden draw, Blackwood demonstrated how to build a smokeless fire, digging a Dakota fire hole 18 inches deep with an air tunnel approaching from downwind, keeping the flames below ground level. His hunting knife made short work of a rabbit, providing their meager dinner. The trick to tracking men, Blackwood explained to Charlie, voice low in the firelight, is remembering they're just animals wearing boots. They leave sign. They make mistakes. They need water. Sarah sat slightly apart, watching the two men with unreadable eyes. When Charlie eventually drifted to sleep, she moved closer to Blackwood. My father's watch, she said quietly, offering it for his inspection. They didn't find it. I kept it hidden all these years. Blackwood examined it in the dying firelight, his callous fingers careful with the delicate object. The initials D.H. were barely visible on its tarnished back. My father was a geologist, Sarah explained. Before the war, he consulted for the government, found something in these hills that terrified him. Turn it over, Blackwood said suddenly. She frowned but did as instructed. The inside of the back cover bore what appeared to be random scratches, but Blackwood's experienced eye recognized them immediately. It's a map, he said, voice hushed with realization. Your father etched a map into his watch. Sarah stared at the markings, seeing them now for what they were, a crude but accurate depiction of a canyon system. That's what Reed was looking for, Blackwood continued, pieces falling into place. Not deserters. This map. A map to what? I don't know, but whatever it is, it was worth burning your home to find. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by ghosts of the past and shadows of what was to come. The next day brought them to the edge of Reed's territory, a rugged expanse of box canyons and scrubland. Through his spyglass, Blackwood counted 8 men at the camp below. Reed himself sat by the fire, the scar on his face visible even from a distance. We wait until dusk, Blackwood whispered, when they're eating, drinking, guards down. Charlie nodded, nervous energy radiating from him. Sarah's face remained impassive, though her knuckles whitened around her father's watch. The attack came swift as a prairie thunderstorm. Blackwood took the first shot, a clean hit from 200 yards that dropped the sentry without a sound. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Blackwood moved with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark. Charlie proved himself worthy, taking down 2 of Reed's men with steady hands. Sarah remained in cover as instructed, but when a bearded outlaw flanked their position, her shot caught him square in the chest. Then came the cry that froze Blackwood's blood. Marshal! Charlie's voice, tight with pain. The young deputy lay sprawled behind a boulder, crimson spreading across his chest. Blackwood was at his side in an instant, pressure on the wound, but the bullet had found its mark too well. Did I do good? Charlie whispered, blood at the corners of his mouth. You did good, son, Blackwood assured him, knowing the lie was the only kindness he could offer now. Charlie's eyes fixed on something distant, then went still. another soul to carry. In the chaos, Reed escaped, but not before leaving his taunting message. Diablo Canyon, Blackwood, come find me. We'll settle our debts. Blackwood buried Charlie at sunrise, using the young man's own knife to carve a crude marker. They left his badge atop the fresh-turned earth, the only honor they could provide on this forsaken stretch of frontier. The journey to Diablo Canyon took them through Apache territory, a risk Blackwood measured carefully against the need for speed. On the second day, as they watered their horses at a hidden spring, movement on the ridge caught his attention. "Don't reach for your gun," he warned Sarah quietly. "We're being watched." The figure that emerged from the rocks wore a mixture of Mexican and American clothing, his face weathered by sun and hardship. A massive Bowie knife hung at his side, alongside an ornate Remington revolver with hand-carved pearl grips. Miguel Sanchez, the man introduced himself, approaching with open hands. "I hunt the one you hunt." Blackwood's hand never strayed far from his Colt. "What's your stake in Reed?" "He butchered my family at Sonora Crossing," Sanchez replied, voice like dry leather. 3 years ago. I have followed him since." That night, the three unlikely allies shared a fire and a bottle of Sanchez's mezcal. The bounty hunter matched Blackwood in age and experience, their conversation a shorthand developed by men accustomed to violence and its aftermath. "Reed searches for something valuable, no?" Sanchez asked, eyes on the flames. Sarah hesitated, then produced the watch. Sanchez studied the crude map with experienced eyes. "This is Diablo Canyon," he confirmed. "But there is more here. These markings, they show a hidden valley. Inside must be what he seeks." "Gold?" Sarah ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. Sanchez shook his head. "Something more. During war, I guide American scientists. They search for special rocks. Uranium, they call it. Very valuable, very dangerous." "Uranium?" Sarah echoed. "For new weapons," Sanchez explained grimly. "Weapons that could destroy cities. Your father, he was geologist, yes? He find this, hide the map, because he know what men like Reed would do with such power." "He never spoke of it," Sarah said softly. "Just said some things should remain buried." "Wise man," Blackwood nodded. "If Reed finds this deposit, he'll sell to the highest bidder." Sanchez finished, the implications clear and terrible. The next morning brought them to the mouth of Diablo Canyon, a jagged wound in the earth that seemed to lead straight to hell itself. The trio moved cautiously, every sense alert for danger. It came without warning, a fusillade of bullets from concealed positions above. Their horses went down instantly. Blackwood grabbed Sarah, pulling her behind a boulder as lead chipped stone all around them. "Run," he commanded, shoving her toward a narrow crevice. "Find cover." Sanchez fired rapidly, providing covering fire, but a shot caught him in the leg. He stumbled, fell. Blackwood moved to help him, but the bounty hunter waved him off. "Save the girl. I will delay them." The last Blackwood saw of Miguel Sanchez, the man was firing defiantly upward, a prayer in Spanish on his lips. Blackwood found Sarah in a narrow cave, pressed against the rock wall, eyes wide but dry. "Sanchez?" she asked. Blackwood shook his head once. "Another debt to pay." "We're trapped," Sarah whispered. "No," Blackwood corrected grimly. "They are." From outside came Reed's mocking voice, echoing against the canyon walls. "Come out, Blackwood. Let's talk like civilized men." "Nothing civilized about you, Reed," Blackwood called back. "That's rich." "Coming from you!" Reed's laughter bounced off the stone. "Should I tell the girl about Pleasant Hill? About what we did to those civilians? On whose orders?" Sarah's questioning gaze burned into Blackwood, who closed his eyes briefly against memories that never stayed buried long enough. "We were following orders," he said quietly. "A suspected Confederate stronghold. But it was just families, women, children." "And you," she began. "I tried to stop it. Too late." Reed enjoyed it. The words felt like stones in his mouth. "That's when I knew what he was, what he'd always been." Reed's voice came again, closer now. "Tick-tock, Marshal. The girl deserves to know who's been playing her hero." Blackwood met Sarah's gaze squarely. Sometimes the line between good men and bad is just one decision. I chose wrong once. I've spent 10 years trying to set it right. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached for her father's watch, opened it, and studied the map one last time. "There's another way out," she said finally. "Through the back of the cave. It leads to the valley." Darkness enveloped them as they navigated the narrow passage. Blackwood led the way, one hand trailing the rough stone wall, the other gripping his Colt. The smell of damp earth and ancient stone filled their nostrils. Somewhere ahead, water dripped in steady rhythm, like a heartbeat counting down their remaining time. "Your father knew about this place," Blackwood said quietly as they moved. "That's why Reed wanted the map. My father discovered the uranium deposit during a government survey before the war," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said it was the largest he'd ever seen. When he realized what it could be used for, he falsified his reports, said there was nothing here." The passage widened suddenly, opening into a vast underground chamber. Blackwood struck a match, illuminating walls that gleamed with strange, greenish veins of ore. "Uranium," he confirmed grimly, "enough to make Reed rich beyond imagining and dangerous beyond measure." Sarah touched the stone wall, her expression solemn. "My father said some things should remain buried. Now I understand why." They made camp in the chamber, the small fire casting long shadows against the mineral-laced walls. Using materials at hand, scraps of rope, loose stones, his hunting knife, Blackwood crafted rudimentary traps at the tunnel entrance. "Reed will come," he stated, checking the action on his Colt one more time. "Men like him always do." "And Sanchez?" Sarah asked. Blackwood's face hardened. "If he's alive, Reed will use him as bait. If he's dead," he left the thought unfinished. The night passed in tense silence. Twice, distant sounds echoed through the tunnels, men searching, but not yet finding their hidden sanctuary. By dawn, though no sunlight reached them here, Blackwood had formulated a plan. "I'm going out," he announced, "to get Sanchez, if he lives, to end Reed, regardless." "That's suicide," Sarah protested. "No," Blackwood countered, checking his ammunition. "It's justice, long overdue." She caught his arm as he turned to leave. "My father died saving you. Don't waste the life he paid for." Blackwood paused, then nodded once. "Stay hidden if I'm not back by nightfall." "I'll be here," she promised. "With this." She patted the rifle at her side. Moving like a shadow, Blackwood retraced their path through the tunnels. Near the entrance, he discovered the first of Reed's men, a bearded outlaw standing guard. The man never heard Blackwood approach, never felt the knife that ended his watch permanently. Outside, morning painted the canyon in shades of blood and gold. From his concealed position, Blackwood surveyed Reed's camp. 6 men remained, including Reed himself. And there, tied to a stake near the fire, was Miguel Sanchez, bloodied but alive. Blackwood circled the camp, using the terrain to remain invisible. The first outlaw died silently, dragged behind a boulder with Blackwood's bandana stuffed in his mouth. The second fell to a precisely thrown knife. By the third, however, luck ran out. A shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. The camp erupted in activity. "It's Blackwood," Reed shouted. "Find him! Kill him!" Gunfire erupted sporadically as the remaining outlaws fired at shadows. Blackwood used the confusion to reach Sanchez, cutting his bonds with a quick slice. "Can you move?" he asked the bounty hunter. Sanchez nodded grimly, blood caked on his face. "I can fight." "Then here." Blackwood pressed his knife into the man's hand. "Make it count." They separated, moving to flank the remaining outlaws. Sanchez, despite his injuries, took down one man with lethal efficiency. Blackwood's Colt barked twice, and 2 more fell. Then, through the gun smoke, Reed himself appeared scar-livid against his pale face, a sawed-off shotgun leveled at Blackwood's chest. "Hello, Captain," Reed sneered, using Blackwood's old military rank. "Still playing the hero?" Blackwood's Colt was empty, its hammer falling on spent casings. Reed's smile widened. "I've waited a long time for this," he said, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot that came wasn't from Reed's shotgun, but from a rifle on the ridge above. Reed staggered, clutching his shoulder, turning in rage toward the source. Sarah Hayes stood on the outcropping, rifle raised for a second shot. Reed roared in fury, swinging his shotgun toward her, but Blackwood was already moving. He tackled Reed hard, sending both men tumbling down a rocky slope. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the air, then clattered away. They struggled in the dust, two old soldiers locked in a final battle. Reed's knife flashed, opening a gash across Blackwood's forearm. Blackwood's fist connected with Reed's jaw, the satisfying crunch of bone accompanying the blow. "Daniel Hayes sends his regards," Blackwood growled, landing another devastating punch. Reed, bloodied but still dangerous, laughed through broken teeth. "Your precious Hayes was a fool, just like you. You think this ends with me? The world's changing, Blackwood. Men like us, we're dinosaurs." Their struggle carried them to the edge of a steep drop. Below, jagged rocks waited like the teeth of a predator. "It's over, Reed," Blackwood declared, pinning the outlaw against the cliff edge. Reed's eyes held no fear, only malice. "Nothing's over. You think you're better than me? We've got the same blood on our hands." "The difference," Blackwood replied, "is I'm still trying to wash mine clean." With a sudden surge of strength born of desperation, Reed broke free, lunging with his knife. Blackwood sidestepped, grabbed Reed's wrist, and used the outlaw's momentum against him. Reed teetered on the edge, eyes widening in belated understanding. "Blackwood," he started. But Blackwood had already stepped back. Reed's balance failed him, and with a final hate-filled scream, he plummeted into the abyss below. Silence descended on Diablo Canyon. Blackwood stood at the cliff edge, blood seeping from his wounds, watching the place where Reed had disappeared. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the weight of a debt finally paid. Sarah and Sanchez found him there, still standing vigil. "Is it done?" Sarah asked quietly. Blackwood nodded once. "It's done." A month later, redemption began to live up to its name. Blackwood, wounds healed to fresh scars, sat on his porch watching the town stirring to life in the early morning. The official papers declaring him Sarah's legal guardian sat on the table beside a cup of steaming coffee. Sarah herself had departed the previous week bound for St. Louis, where she'd enrolled in a prestigious law school. Her parting words still echoed in his mind. "My father saved your life so you could save mine. Now I'll use mine to save others." The uranium deposit remained their secret. Blackwood had used his authority to declare Diablo Canyon off-limits, officially citing unstable ground. Unofficially, he'd granted the surrounding territory to the local Apache tribe, ensuring the deadly ore would remain buried for generations to come. Miguel Sanchez had stayed in redemption, accepting Blackwood's offer to become the town's new deputy. The bounty hunter had found something he thought lost forever, a purpose beyond vengeance, a community to protect. As the sun climbed higher, Blackwood's fingers traced the badge on his chest thoughtfully. The metal was warm to the touch, as if alive with its own purpose. "Justice isn't always pretty," he murmured to himself, "but it's always necessary." The quiet moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders, too many for the regular mail coach. Blackwood rose slowly, hand dropping instinctively to his holster. 5 riders appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind them. Even at a distance, Blackwood recognized trouble. Men who rode like that weren't bringing good news. By the time they reached the edge of town, Blackwood stood in the middle of the street, feet planted firmly in the dust. "That's far enough," he called out as they approached. The lead rider, a thin man with a face like tan leather, reined in his horse, looking for Marshal Blackwood. "You found him." The man's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Name's Hollister. These are my brothers. We're associates of Jackson Reed." "Reed's dead," Blackwood stated flatly. "We know." Hollister's hand moved toward his gun. "That's why we're here." What happened next was a blur of motion, gun smoke, and blood. Blackwood's draw was lightning, 2 shots that dropped Hollister and the man to his right before either cleared leather. Sanchez, emerging from the saloon, took down a third with a single well-placed bullet. The remaining 2 Hollister brothers opened fire, bullets splintering wood around Blackwood. He rolled behind a water trough, came up shooting. One more fell. The last Hollister, younger than the others, hesitated. His gun wavered. "Drop it, boy," Blackwood ordered. "Live to see tomorrow." For a moment, it seemed the young man might comply. Then his face hardened, and he raised his pistol. Blackwood's final shot echoed through Redemption streets. The last Hollister brother joined his kin in the dust. As the gun smoke cleared, townspeople emerged cautiously from buildings. Sanchez approached, reloading his revolver. "There will be more," he said quietly. Blackwood nodded, feeling the weight of his years. "There always are." Yet as he looked around at the town he'd sworn to protect at the faces of people who now looked to him, not with fear, but with respect, he knew he'd keep standing in the street as long as necessary. For Charlie, for Daniel Hayes, for Sarah, for all the debts that could never truly be repaid, but must be honored nonetheless. That evening, a letter arrived from Sarah, along with a small package. Inside was her father's watch, the hidden map, now a relic of a chapter closed. "Some debts can never be repaid," she'd written, "but some gifts should never be forgotten." Blackwood hung the watch from a nail in his cabin, where the morning sun would catch its silver surface. Some nights, when sleep proved elusive, he would take it down, open its case, and study the map that had led to so much bloodshed and, finally, to a measure of peace. Years later, visitors to Redemption would hear tales of the iron-willed marshal who had transformed a lawless outpost into a thriving community. Some would notice the silver watch displayed prominently in the town museum, alongside a faded photograph of a distinguished female judge in her robes, the first woman to serve on the territorial court. "There are men born to make history," the museum placard read, "and men compelled to correct it." Wyatt Blackwood was both. And in the cemetery on the hill, where Charlie Miller's grave had long since been joined by others, Blackwood's marker would eventually stand beneath an old oak tree, bearing a simple epitaph chosen by Judge Sarah Hayes herself. "The debt is paid in full.